So, good evening, everyone. My name is Ophir Gutelzon, and I am part of one of the founders of Unacceptable. It's an international movement for safeguarding Israeli democracy in a Jewish and democratic Israel. And uh, give you a brief introduction on why we are meeting today, and then we'll quickly move on to the subject at hand. But just to keep you posted and updated, this is the 669th day of this war that started on October 7th with the heinous crime of Hamas against us. And over the past 48 hours, after the difficult images that we saw of Aviatar David and Rom Breslavsky and the difficult images of the hunger in Gaza, we're once again in a constitutional crisis. Yesterday, the government, despite all the warnings from the Supreme Court, decided to impeach Gali Baharav-Miara, the Attorney General. The Supreme Court issued an injunction over this dismissal, and now the First Minister has already announced that he will not respect this injunction. That's Minister Talli will discuss that more in depth. And simultaneously, with all that commotion going on, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided to announce through his channels, he calls himself, a senior official. He announced his plan to fully occupy Gaza in order to achieve a decisive victory over Hamas, despite the danger that this poses over the lives of the hostages that are still alive, and the bodies of the hostages that are also supposed to be transferred to Israel at some point. And in addition to that, our, democratic position is going downhill. Today, we are joined by two very important individuals, Dina Zilber, who is the former Deputy Attorney General, and Dan Meridor, that some of you know who is, some do not. Dina has joined us in the past, and Dan is joining us for the first time. Dan Meridor, if you don't know who he is, he is former Minister of Justice and also former Minister of Finance, right, Dan? And has always and he is a vigilant protector of Israeli democracy. And like I said, Dina is a former Deputy Attorney General. Thank you for joining us on such a short notice, especially the two of you, Dan and Dina. And let me just tell you what our agenda is. We'll take now 35 to 40 minutes to hear from Dina and Dan about the two topics at hand, the escalation of the war and also the way the Israeli democracy is heading downhill. So let's start with you, Dan, if that's okay with you, Dina. And I would like, we're all here. Neri is saying all of us are concerned. I think we're even quite anxious for the fate of the state of Israel. We are here, Israelis and Jews and Israelis who live outside of Israel. I see that quite a few Israelis have joined us. And the question I'd like to give, if you could give us an overview as somebody that has been through so much. Are we on the brink of the abyss, on the verge of the abyss, at the red line, just before the abyss? Where exactly are we? So good evening from Jerusalem, and good morning to all of you in Palo Alto and whatever's, along the way between Jerusalem and Palo Alto. Let me just clarify something from the outset. I have set a rule for myself that my very clear-cut and adamant opinions, I express them either in Israel or to Israelis and Jews abroad. I do not attack the Israeli government in the foreign media. And I understand that the people who are on this talk are Israelis and Jews, and every person who's a Jew has an option to be an Israeli. So that's was important for me to say that. So two issues came up: the issue of democracy and the issue of war. I'll start with the democratic issue and then we'll move on to the war. Democracy is finding itself at a crisis worldwide, not just in Israel. There's a very serious question. You can see it very clearly in the US and in Europe and in other places. Usually, democracy is defined as the rule of the majority, but that's not the case. Stalin had a majority, Hitler had a majority, so democracy isn't the rule of majority. The thing is what majority is not allowed to do. Perhaps, if you will, human rights, and which rights cannot be touched normatively or institutionally. The court is an institution, will not acquit somebody that the majority wishes to be acquitted. They have to be committed to certain values and to protect them from the majority. That's the heart of democracy. And we had in America between 1786 to Lincoln, the Afro-Americans couldn't vote. Until 1920, women couldn't vote. So the court can be part of a majority, and then it doesn't defend or protect human rights. And democracy is based on this balance, and this balance is under an attack, a very populist attack. They're saying to people, well, that's what the people chose. That's what they voted. So what can you do? And it's a matter that in Israel, now in Israel, more than in other countries in the world, the court has a special role. Because in other countries, for example, in the US, you have a constitution and there's the Bill of Rights, the human rights that are set in the constitution. But in Israel, you don't have that. The protector of the Israeli democracy is not the Knesset, it's the court. It hasn't been decided yet that there is a freedom of expression, what they call the First Amendment in the US. And this is why the court has utmost importance for protecting and maintaining Israeli democracy. In recent years, especially since the establishment of this government in January of 2023, they are characterized with an attack against this system because of its values. And it can be attributed to three things: the global trend I mentioned of populism. The second matter is ideological groups in Israel that were quite marginalized, that weren't considered legitimate. They came from the US, Kahana, racism. They received legitimacy. Netanyahu needs them, and this discourse is now kind of edged its way into the mainstream. And there's also the issue of Netanyahu's trial, and because of that trial, he decided that instead to go to court and either be found guilty or innocent, he decided to go against the system. He attacked the judiciary and the attorney general. And when somebody of great influence does that, it has a tremendous impact on the general population, and it led to a very dangerous change in public opinion, because if you're not accepting the authority of the court, why would citizens accept it? And now we've had some very significant and impressive public resistance and objection to that during the first year, and then they were forced to freeze some of these steps they wanted to execute. And then added to that, we have this terrible war that started in October of 2023, and instead of that stopping the regime overall, they're actually exploiting it and continuing with it. And it's this struggle. It hasn't been decided yet. People are highly concerned with it because that changes not just the judiciary, it changes the entire regime, the culture of this country, its nature. There's something very profound in democratic Israel. Perhaps I'll say that about Zionism. Zionism always said two things: that the Jews, this land should go to the Jews, and it should be ruled by a majority Jewish majority. The Arabs objected to that. The British objected to that. Why do we need a Jewish majority? Because Zionism always assumed that the Arabs would also vote, that we have equality. If we have no equality, it's no longer Zionism, it's something else. Now they're looking for all these kinds of tricks in order to rule the entire territory from the Jordan River to the sea, and that they won't be able to vote. So it's a terrible crisis. not just to democracy, in the main essence of our lives, who we are. We need to be a strong country. We saw what happened when we were weak. But that's not enough. We should also be just. And these values of justice and power always guided us politically. The Likud movement, and I was one of its representatives for many years, that was a movement where that balance between the national issue and the liberal issue was critical. On the national Jewish level, a Jewish state, Jewish security, saving Jews, that was the heart of our activities. But we were also defenders of human rights, democracy, equality, liberties, because without this balance, you can reach one of the extremes, either the political extreme or the nationalist extreme. And the Likud, which was a very large movement in Israel, became a nationalist movement. The liberal aspect was almost completely deleted. That's what, because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. And now this is the struggle we see all over Israel, and greatly so. And it's also connected to the war. And now I'm going to say a few words about the war. Maybe I can elaborate later. As we all know, we were brutally attacked by Hamas on October 7th, about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago. And we reacted, and we didn't start the war, and then Hezbollah joined, and then the Houthis joined, and the also situation in Judea Samaria, and Iran joined with hundreds of rockets. It became something regional, and Israel reacted, responded. I don't want to get into too many details. Suffice to say that it's completely obvious that there was justification for this reaction, and Hamas should have received such a serious blow. But when you go to war in the modern era, when we're talking about asymmetrical wars, not country versus country, you need to be cautious of the goal which you set. Don't set a goal which is not achievable. And every person with some reason, no, you cannot completely annihilate a terror organization with military means. So it was justified, the military campaign, but it should have been short, and it should have been followed by a diplomatic measure that would serve as an alternative to Hamas. And there was a suggestion by the American administration or Biden, and that the there will be a PA that's a bit weak with the support of the Emirates and others, but the government rejected that because they didn't want the Palestinian Authority, and we found ourselves in this long war, and when the hostages, 50 hostages, 20 still alive, are there for over 660 days, and it's terrible. Of course, people get killed in the war, but here you don't understand the purpose of the war. I mean, what we haven't achieved in 22 months, what can we achieve now? And this is why this is raising a major difficulty. And now there's a debate in Israel between the military generals and the politicians. It has not ended yet. It's still going on. And the question we need to think about in the context of the right to fight, to wage war, we have that right. The war needs to be conducted in line with the rules of warfare. These rules didn't exist until several decades ago. The Americans, as we know, bombed civilians with nuclear bombs, and they bombarded Germany, and that was a different world. After World War II, the world has changed, and then the conventions were created, like the Geneva Convention, and we're always very proud of the fact that we abided by these rules. What's happening in Gaza, let me say this cautiously, is placing a question mark to what extent we're adhering to that. And let me add another aspect in addition to the legal one. Until about 50 years ago, when there were wars, nobody could see the wars as they were happening from their homes. There was a war in Russia, and in Paris, they could keep going to restaurants. That was during the Napoleon Wars, and only when he returned home, they knew that the war didn't go well. Today, we can see the war real time on the screen constantly. Now, there's something we need to pay attention to. War is something ugly, terrible. People are getting killed, children looking for their parents, homes are being destroyed. And now, if you're very strong, you seem to be the villain. If you're very weak, you seem to be the underdog that needs help. And this is why you cannot have any long wars, because if you're losing the war on the screen, you're simply losing the war. And it happened to us, whether there was a campaign leading to that, and the fact that Israel is strong, this Goliath versus David, it's destructive for Israel. And of course, there's basic anti-Semitism, and all that is true. But even
המקומות האלה מתנפל
decent
עליהם
people,
גם.
when they see
תראו
these
כמה הוא
images,
רץ,
it's very
לממשלה שלא
difficult for
הבינה
them.
את
A
זה, מעבר
serious
לשעת
mistake of our
הצדק
government that
והחוק,
they didn't
אסור
realize
לנהל
that
מלחמות
in
ארוכות
addition to the
במצב
issue
הזה.
of law and justice,
אז
in
אנחנו
such a
עשינו את זה
situation, you
טוב מול
cannot be involved
חיזבאללה,
in a long
מלחמה
war. So we
קצרה
did it well
ומוצלחת
with
גם מול איראן,
Hezbollah. It was a short
כוח
and
אפקויים
successful
בעניין
war,
ארוך,
and then with Iran as
מסובך
well.
ולא
But
טוב.
this is something very
ואנחנו
long
היום
and
בימים אלה
complicated and
בגיבוש
not
ההחלטה,
good.
ונראה לאן
And
זה הולך. עד
these
כאן
are
דבריי
days in
הראשונים.
which we need to
בבקשה.
decide. So far,
תודה
the
רבה,
strange
גל.
things I had to say. Thank you.
דינה,
Thank you,
אנחנו
Dan.
עוברים אלייך.
Dina, let's now move on to
נשים אותך
you.
לספוטלייט, דרעי תעשה את זה.
Let's put you on the spotlight.
דינה, אנחנו התעדכנו, אני חושב, לפני 3 או 4
So,
חודשים על
a
המצב
few
שאנחנו
months ago,
שצפינו אותו, שיגיע
we talked about the situation that we
יגיע
predicted
אלינו.
that
שנייה, אז כתוב מיוט.
would happen,
והוא הגיע.
and it
אתמול
has happened.
התראיינת כמה פעמים
Yesterday, you
בתקשורת
were
על
interviewed
המצב,
several times in the
זה
media
חשוב
about the
לתת
situation,
קונטקסט
and
קצר, כי
it's
רוב האנשים פה
important to
לדעתי,
give a brief
אולי יש לנו
context
אנשים
because
חדשים, אבל רוב
most
האנשים
people here,
מכירים את
maybe there are some
הסיטואציה
newcomers,
של
but most people are
ה-challenge של
familiar
ההפיכה
with
המשטרית,
the challenge
אבל
of the regime
למה אנחנו
overall.
נמצאים בנקודה
But
אחרת
why
עכשיו?
are
בואי
we
תני לנו
at a
סקירה
different
קצרה מה קורה
point
בעולם.
right now? Perhaps if you could give
אוקיי,
us a brief
קודם כל תודה רבה על
overview of
ההזמנה,
where we're at.
ואני
Okay,
רוצה
first of
גם
all,
להגיד
thank you
שאני
very
ממש
much for
שמחה
inviting me.
וגאה
Let me say that I'm
ששותפי
very happy and proud that
לאירוע הזה
my
של פורום משפטים,
co-panelist in
גם
this
קרין
event is
אסטרטגי
former Minister of Justice
בכתבה
and of
וולונטרית
Finance
טוב, אני חושבת
and of
שכששומעים
Strategic
אותו
Affairs, Mr. Dan
יש
Meridor.
רגעים
When you
רבים
hear
שבהם
him, you
אפשר
really
לקחת
start
תפיסה יכולה
missing
וצריכה
or
לראות את
longing
הפוליטיקה
and thinking, wow,
ולהשלים
this
את
is
זה
how
למה
politics should
שמתחולל
look like
היום
and could have
בזירה
looked like it
הפוליטית
when you compare it
בישראל
to the
לאורך
current
כל
situation in the
הרצף, זה לא
political
עניין
arena
של
in Israel.
עמדה
Throughout the
פוליטית, זה עניין
spectrum,
של
it's not a matter
הבנה
of
אינטלקטואלית
political
מוסרית
position,
ואנושית.
it's a matter of a moral and
אני חושבת
intellectual
שזה הדמויות
level. I
של
think that
שליחי
this
הציבור
is
באמת
the kind of
עשו
people we would
פוליטיקה
like to see as
כחלק
publicly
מתוך
elected
שליחות ציבורית
figures, people
וכדי
who were involved in
לשרת את
politics
ציבור
because it
הישראליות.
was a mission
פשוט
for them to
תמונת
serve
קונטרסט
their
מוחלטת
voters
ממה
and to
שאנחנו רואים
the
היום,
entire
שלטון
country. And it's a complete opposite
שתקוע
of
אך
what we
ורק
see today, a
בשררה
government that's
ובטובתו האישי,
completely only
כשכל
engrossed in their own
האינטרסים
personal
האחרים טובת
benefits and in
אזרחי מדינת
gaining more and
ישראל
more power. And the
משועבדים
best
לעניין הזה.
interest
ואני
of the
חושבת
citizens of
שיש צד
Israel
אפילו
are
במישור הציבורי.
subjugated to that purpose. And
שמענו נושאים שעלו
it
אתמול על
also is
סדר יומה של
related
הממשלה, אז
to
כל
the
המצב
topics that were on the
נחשפנו
government's meeting
לסרטונים
yesterday. What was
קורעי
on
לב
the
של
agenda? We saw these terrible,
חטופי
terrible
משפט
videos of the
וחיילים
hostages that are dying,
בסיטואציות בלתי
literally,
אפשריות
and
בעזה,
soldiers in some
מלחמה
impossible
שמתמשכת,
situations in Gaza, the
גלי
war that's
התאבדויות,
just raging
פשיעה
on,
בתוך
a wave
ישראל,
of
כלכלה קורסת,
suicides. The
כל המדינות
economy is
מכריזות על
collapsing, the
הכרזת
crime rates in
מדינה
Israel.
פלסטינית
15 countries have
בספטמבר,
announced
ומה
that they're
מכל
going
הדברים
to
האלה הממשלה
recognize
דנה?
a Palestinian
סעיף
state in
ראשון על
September.
סדר
And
היום
what of
שלה
all that is the government
בישיבה ביום
discussing? The
שני
first
היה
item on
חיזוי
its
האבטחה
agenda
של
on
ראש
Monday
הממשלה
was
ומערכת
to
הביטחון, וזה
increase, to
הדבר הכי
augment
דחוף,
the
הכי בוער, הכי
security
חשוב,
detail to the prime minister
שדנים
and his
בו
family,
שעה
as if
שהן
this is the
מתות,
most urgent
והדבר
and important
השני
thing. It was the first thing discussed on the
שלא
agenda.
חסרים קטעים
And the
מדממים
second item, as
בעמדה
if there
הציבורית
aren't enough
הישראלית, אז
bleeding
בואו
wounds in the Israeli
נעמיק
public
ונקטע
sphere,
להב
let's
לתוך
further increase
הרצף
and
החברתי
deepen these and put our
שאנחנו
knife to
עסוקים בו
this
בשנתיים
social
האחרונות,
wound
ונדיח את
that
היועץ
we've been
המשפטי לממשלה.
engaged in the past 2 years
עכשיו, למה זה
and
דבר
sack
כל כך
the
מעורר
attorney
רגע,
general.
חשש?
Now, why is
שנייה
that?
דינה, מה התפקיד של היועץ המשפטי לממשלה
So
ואיך הוא
could you
שונה
maybe
יחסית
explain a
לעולם?
bit what is the role of the
אוקיי,
Attorney General
אז
in
יש
Israel and how it
בישראל
differs from the roles of Attorney Generals in other countries?
דמוקרטיה
Look, Israel is a
ששותפה בסמכות של
democracy
הרוב,
that evolved
בתנאים
kind of
שהם לא שגרתיים
ex-topically
כאלה,
outside of the womb,
כשמדינה
and
שצריכה בתנאים כאלה
a
הצליחה
country that
לשמר
was
משטר
evolved.
דמוקרטי
It's
במשך
surprising that the country
75
evolved under
שנים.
such conditions, managed to
מה
maintain a
שמסביר
democratic
את
regime
ההתפתחות
over
של מדינת ישראל
75
כדמוקרטיה
years.
מול
And what
ארצות הברית
defines
למשל, זה
the
העובדה
evolution of the
שבאמת
state of Israel as a
קמה
democracy versus the US, for
מתוך
example, is the fact
מלחמה,
that it was established
מקבץ
following
של
a war,
70 מדינות
coming together of
שצריכות לשבת
70
ולהפוך
communities,
כיד אחת
of 70
ולקיים
diasporas that had
כמובן
to
אחרי
forge together
השואה
into one
וקצת
entity. And of
קשה
course, after
במצב
the
של
Holocaust in a very difficult economic
רק 600
situation,
אלף איש במדינת
and back then there were
ישראל
only
והחברה הבינלאומית לא
600,000
הייתה אמורה,
people
והיא
in
קמה
the
ללא
state of
חוקה.
Israel, and
זאת
there
אומרת,
wasn't
לא
any
היה
international
איזשהו
recognition of
מכנה
it, and it
משותף
was founded without a
חברתי שכולם
constitution. There
יכולים
wasn't some
לסמוך
kind of a
עליו, שחלה פה
constitutional common
נקודת ההתחלה, זה
denominator
קרה
everybody could group
במשך
around.
תקופתנו.
It didn't happen during the
ולמעשה
first year
הדברים
after the
האלה
establishment of the
התחילו
state and never after. So under these conditions, the democracies, like the tree that was planted a bit to the offside and then it grows to the offside, it should have been straightened decades ago. It hasn't happened, and now we bear the fruits of that, the terrible fruits of that. So many of the mechanisms we have in the US, for example, separation of church and state, for example, a constitution, for example, the fact that you have the federal government and the state administration, the fact that there are two houses, that there's the Congress, that there's a president, that indeed there is a separation between the authorities and there is this checks and balances separation between them. In Israel, the democracy is limited in the sense that there was never a complete separation between the government and the Knesset because of the coalitionary regime in Israel, and it's grown even worse in recent years. The parliamentary control mechanisms we've had in previous Knessets have completely disappeared in this Knesset, which is simply the replication of the long arm of the government. It doesn't do anything that the government doesn't allow it to do. Knesset members with independent views are punished. Let me remind you of the COVID period in which a Knesset member who was part of the coalition, Ifat Shasha Biton, and she wanted in the committee to hold a discussion regarding the restrictions imposed on businesses and the closing down of swimming pools, not a major political issue, but the fact that she convened a discussion in contrast to the government's position, she was punished and there were political sanctions exercised against her. So the only guarantees or guardrails we have in Israel to guarantee liberal rights is, first of all, the court, the judiciary system led by the High Court of Justice and the Supreme Court that has effective judiciary review over the government's decision, and it does takes its role very seriously, and it has received international appreciation, and it's a true court that's highly appreciated, that has actual judicial review over the acts of the government. It doesn't hesitate to intervene wherever it transgresses the law of the government. That's one anchor. The second anchor, which is even more important, and that's a bit different to the American system, that's the institution of the Attorney General. In the US, it's called the Attorney General. It's a political figure, but in Israel, ever since its establishment and all was a result of, various historical circumstances. We won't get into that, but the person who was chosen to this position was somebody professional. The first minister of justice in the state of Israel, Pinchas Rosen, he was a legal expert, but he thought that it shouldn't be a political entity that's in charge of the general prosecution, because then it could be used for settling scores. And he thought that you need some kind of a legal expert in this position. And he recommended to David Ben-Gurion to appoint, a judicial figure of great prominence, and that became, the what happened. So it's not a political person, not somebody who is elected, but but what the politicians call a civil servant, they use it in a derogatory way, but I think that this is a highly respectable title. A civil servant is a person who wasn't elected, but he is the authorized interpreter of the law by the executive, and as long as the court didn't decide otherwise, he's part of the executive. And just as in the executive, there's somebody saying to the government, let's say that it cannot go beyond the budget and not to break the credit framework. And just like you have security experts, because almost every government act has a legal angle to it, there's someone, in this case it's a woman, the current Attorney General, and she explains to the government what the legal situation is and how to execute the policy in a way that will comply with international standards and will not be rejected by the High Court of Justice. And the situation in this government is that this is a government which consistently is not willing to accept or hear from anyone, whether it's somebody from politics or somebody professional, that's saying no to it, reflecting a difficulty. Let's just give you some examples. Let's remember what happened to the Minister of Defense, Gallant, who was an important member of the Likud party, and he wanted to reflect the dangers of promoting the judiciary overall in case of versus the security situation. He was brutally sacked by the prime minister. Let's take another example. The previous general chief of staff, and he's now no longer in office. And in certain periods, the prime minister refused his request. He said, I want you to hear the implications of the judiciary overall, that if you pass the law for reducing the probability cause, and he wouldn't meet with him. He didn't want to hear about the security dimension in real time. The director of the Shin Bet, the ISA, that the government tried to fire him and impeach him, and he finally resigned, even though the High Court of Justice, because the High Court of Justice didn't allow the government to fire him. And yesterday they tried to fire the Attorney General, and they also, in another room, fired Yuli Edelstein, the chair of the Security and Foreign Affairs Committee, Knesset members who's been part of the Likud for many years, and nobody can say that he's a leftist or a hater of Israel, all, of course, in quotation marks. So in inverted commas, it's not that the government has a problem with the Attorney General, but in general, there's a problem with this government, that anyone who's trying to reflect some kind of a professional security or legal truth in any field, and if they don't like it, if it contradicts the political or personal interest they have in a certain point in time, their method is not to deal with a problem, but to just simply remove that person who's trying to say there's a problem. So that's the story of the Attorney General.
הנזק הנורא הוא לאזרחי מדינת ישראל, כי בעצם המשמעות היא שהממשלה רוצה...
And the
great
terrible
damage
damage
to
is to
Israel
Israeli
because
citizens,
the
because
government
it
wants to
means the
function with no
government
law. It
wishes
wants to
to
function in a reality
operate
where
without
everything they
the
want,
law.
the government wants to do, it's allowed to do.
כתוב כזה, למרחבים של
And
ארצות הברית,
everything goes, even if we talk about the states,
סוג של מערב
they
פרוע,
want
רוצים
some
מרחבים
sort of
שבהם לא תהיה
passage where they
ממשלה שהיא
have no limitations over them. And the comparison, Dina is probably correct, is to the executive orders that Trump has issues every other day, and then he goes to court. Netanyahu would have liked, and Smotrich would have liked to have everything, one-sided done by the government. Yes, actually, it's funny, it's a bit sad that you brought up this comparison, because even something that happened in the States a couple of days ago regarding impeaching of the federal attorney in Jersey, yes, but also the statistician. I mean, everything is happening so fast. So in Israel, about 2 years ago, there was some intention by the prime minister to have a statistician, chief statistician, which is a role that is so professional and must be a doctor of statistics and such things. And he wanted to appoint Yossi Shelley, and later he was the director general of the minister's office, because he was so excelling, so to speak. They wanted to kick him out, actually. So now the papers are saying that they're looking for different jobs for him, to have a control over all the lands of Israel or in III. I want to share screen for just 1 second, if you permit, because there's something called, it's an initiative called Restart Israel. They have an amazing strategy, an amazing director, and they create a lot of content. Just look at this. What they present here is, I mean, the reason that is that the government, so to speak, said that they would impeach the attorney general is because she opposes the government's decision on all the time. And the data here, in fact, shows that only in 19 out of 3,200 cases and appeals, or whatever they were, she avoided from representing the government. But I don't know what exactly it was. I suppose it has to do with power, decisions that have to do with the power. But just to transmit the fact that these claims that you might hear in other channels, it's important to remember this number. These are decisions authorized by the government. These are 19 cases she avoided from representing them, and 3,200 cases where she did represent the government. So I just wanted to share this number with you. So yes, only 1.5% of government resolutions that were accepted, she in fact thought were illegal, and therefore refused to bring them to the court and defend them because it's illegal. In fact, the government is supposed to also act legally, and the government is expected to, to operate legally. It's something that is not against the civilians, but quite the contrary. In every country where we live, governments are supposed to operate legally. And when they're expected to work this way. It's not opposing the government, but rather it's an elementary way to assist the government, not a way, it's not an obstacle to them. If someone insists on operating illegally, they will have to bear the ramifications. If someone decides to promote something that is brought to the Supreme Court and is not listening to the general attorney and insists on defending that, they will have to meet international sanctions, or the Supreme Court might stop them, or it might cost more to the government because they now need to give money. I'm sorry, I want to please move forward because our time is short and we also want to have a time for Q&A. And I want to ask both of you, Dina and Dan. Dina, is there anything else you want, anything to close up with? So I think that during the past 2 years, we've had a lot of points on the agenda. We are in fact asleep with our eyes open because all the time things are happening, and in fact the judicial overall is moving forward, but impeaching the general attorney is major. It's dramatic on the scale of in a scale of 7 Richter, 7 points Richter. It's like a governance earthquake. In one way, she is more important than the court because she's the first line of defense for the rule of the law. She is the institutional entity, you know, and under her there are many other people working for her, and these are people working all the different ministers and advise all of the different authorities how to operate legally. And if you put her away, it means in fact that all of the operations of the government is now you know, in question whether it's legal or not. So it means that all the conception that means that as a whole, a government or an authority is supposed to operate legally, and so the court will not intervene so much. And now what we expect to see is that the Supreme Court, it only has 12 out of its 15 judges, that is, so it's already 2/3 of the regular amount of people there. And what the amount of cases that they are asked to see per year is so great. And so we cannot expect Supreme Court to be the only one seeing to all of our problems and caring for democracy and guarding it. And the attempt to impeach her is part of a triple move, and we need to be very vigilant about it because it's about to take place during the upcoming months. After that is, the government wants to impeach her and close this point, and after that they will start taking care of the judiciary. And it's going to, first of all, they're going to appoint political people that are absolutely unworthy from a professional point of view to the Supreme Court. And the second phase of it that they did pass in during the overall the judiciary overall is changing the committee that chooses the judges, and it's changing the DNA of the committee. And the third point is the taking the committee for the elections, the chief committee. They're going to change it, and a government that is able to do so many things, what is it for them to change a professional, a judge in the Supreme Court, and take a political pawn instead of him? And this way they're going to take this stronghold, which is another institutional entity that is supposed to reduce manipulations in elections and such, and any changes of sections of regions of elections, etc. And all these changes and manipulations would make it so that, for example, in Arabic regions who do not vote, for example, or great urban parts that do not like the government, they could bring different tricks and manipulations, and I don't want to provide any ideas. So using it, on the one hand, to use the court by impeaching the general attorney and changing the mixture of the committee for the elections is quite worrying. So just while we're speaking on live, all of the different WhatsApp groups decided to put on the red alarm. Everyone are now going out to the streets because the cabinet decided to enhance the Gaza war on the expense of the soldiers and the hostages and all the other people affected by the war, and of course the Gazan civilians. So everyone in Israel, this is a red alert to take to the streets, and we will think what we're going to do here. Dan, I want to add you to this conversation now,
וזה
and
חשוב כאילו
it's
שאנשים כרגע
important
מנסים לצאת החוצה
because people are now trying to take to the
לאנדרלמנות
streets.
ונושאים.
Let's unmute. Okay.
איך לדעתך
How do you
הסיפור הזה של
think this
השילוב בין
question of combining
ביטול מוסד, כאילו
canceling
בעצם
that
הדחת
is
היועצת
impeaching, that is, the general
בהוראות של
attorney
קבינט,
from the
מתי
cabinet world.
כביכול פעולות
And at
כאלה
this
היו
point,
מתייעצים כבר עם
such
היועצת המשפטית או
actions
היועץ המשפטי,
that were taken in the
והאם
cabinet
יש
tonight, is it
משמעות
something that
לזה שזה
they
קורה
were
במקביל,
supposed to
ובכל
discuss it
זאת
with the general
לפני
attorney,
קורה?
or is it meaningful, or maybe by accident that it is happening at the same time?
דינה נגע בזה.
Look, Dina touched it
היועצת
briefly.
עומדת באמת
We are now at a point where the general attorney is almost alone, standing almost alone, heroically facing a huge system of lies and defamation and attacks and aggression. And if she falls truly, the democracy is in great danger. They have a win-win situation here. They, the government, that is, if the Supreme Court stops them from firing her, which will probably happen, they will say, of course, Supreme Court is a leftist, so attacking the Supreme Court is part of it, right? So this campaign is very significant, and I want to say something about the essence, the deeper essence. Dina said, and I also said, we don't have a constitution, a state with so much differences, so many differences. How are we upholding life together and democracy without a constitution? A constitution usually determines the basic values and the rules of the game. And these are acceptable to everyone. You respect the decisions of the Knesset or of the courts, and nobody said anything else before. But now this attack is of these values, of the rules of the game. It's not discussions about peace or territories, capitalism, socialism. That was fine for us. We were able to deal with that. We never had such a great difference about democracy. The words democracy and the rule of the law, human rights, if today they are pronounced by someone, this person is immediately marked as leftist. And Menachem Begin, the head of the Likud, used to say that. It's not a political disagreement. It's about the way we live. These are the disagreements. So these values are under attack. And also the rules of the game, the institutions defending those rules. The court is under attack because the court is still committed. So they're trying to contempt it, to illegitimate, to delegitimate it, to bring people and put them inside, the people that are from their own side. And the States has witnessed that because they have a different system. And after the second term of Trump, they already canceled a lot of things. And the court could be that. So this is part of the campaign. And indeed, there is a great importance to the question of how we combat, how we win, how we manage this struggle. I don't think that this struggle would be only decided upon in the streets. In about 1 year, we're supposed to have an election at about October 2026. Will he be able to play with the date? In the States, they tried to do that. We've seen an attempt on January. And he almost made it. If not Mike Pence, who knows where would have been. So using the bad example we've had from the States, we can use that. These two people, Trump and Netanyahu, they probably are learning from each other. They're getting more confident looking at the other. So we do have the risk of them trying to play, that is, with the elections, or maybe postponing them. You need a lot of money to do that. It will be hard for them to postpone, but they might try to influence the elections in different ways, the results. They want to put cameras into the ballots. And who knows what they're going to do with those? This is still ahead of us. It's a struggle to be fought. But what I said before, it's quite concerning. What is still keeping me a bit optimistic is that Netanyahu does not want the elections. Why doesn't he want those? He's seeing the polls, and he sees in all the polls that he's about to lose. In every poll, he doesn't have a majority. He's not able to come to the majority he now has. So there is something very healthy, profoundly healthy, if we take it that the polls are indeed reflecting the public opinion. And so we have something to work with. The public, most of the public wants to see a change. A different question that we cannot answer right now is who's going to take his place. Not only the men, but the opposition to Netanyahu is very diverse. We have people there who are more to the right than he is, such as Lieberman, maybe even Bennett. I'm not sure where he stands. There are people to the left, Yair Golan and others. We have people from the middle, from central, such as Gadi Eisenkot, the former chief of staff, Yair Lapid. So the opposition is not one person, but the resilience to make Netanyahu go home is quite strong. And we need to be very wise about the way we maintain this struggle and be very organized in order to have a majority to change it. By the way, the change is not easy. What has happened has already happened. I said before, I touched it. The frontiers of democracy, the character of Israel is being changed. In 1984, we had a visitor from the States, Meir Kahana, and he decided to run for elections. Supreme Court was not able to stop him because there wasn't any law saying that racists are not allowed to run. We changed the law that anyone being racist cannot run for elections. And we from the Likud, me personally, we collected a lot of materials, that things he said. And in 1988, he was disqualified. And we said it's impossible in a democratic state, people who were victims to racism, we will not be racist. Zionism is not racism. And he was out. Netanyahu, wanted to appease some racists just like him, and he brought them in the government. This has already happened. The attacks of the judiciary system, nobody ever dared to speak like a bully, and now this is something that has already happened. If we will have a new government, the new government has a very big task, heading to be normative again, to be respectful, to give dignity to the different institutions, to education. Not all of this is something that we can change. Not everything must go by strength, by bullying, by aggression. And I spoke to people who consulted with me. There's a feeling as if all of the politicians are so cynicism and only care about strength and power. If it's in the underdog is in fact saying the opposite. We are here to serve the public. People who want to do that, maybe we have a chance of making a change. It's very essential to us. And additionally, there's the war. It might sound like an absurd. There's a great tight connection between these things. If he doesn't want elections, is not doing things that are good for Israel. Clearly, these things would make the government fall apart, dissolve. Things like occupying Gaza, and of course the government wants it. So the question is, what can just anyone do? I hope people here recognize me and keep coming and say, what will happen, what will happen? And I say to people, don't ask what will happen. Ask yourself, what can I do today? I speak also to Jewish people outside of Israel, but every day I appear I write articles or I go on the strikes. The responsibility is on us. We need to make an effort to stop this craziness and bring us back to the high road on which we marched before. There is someone, both Dina and Dan, there's one person very much known in the States. His name is President Herzog. Do you think in such a state as we are at, where we are at now, I remember he said a couple of months ago that once democracy is imploding, then I will speak up. Is it now? Should we expect him to speak up now? And we have a lot of Americans, Jewry, they have a lot of strength. Should these people also address him now and ask him to interfere? And I think that I know what is the legal answer, but my question is what you personally think, if there is even a cause to speak to him now. She's muted. Okay. So I'm saying, I think that the number one citizen in the state of Israel, the president, of course, the Israeli democracy and its revival. I mean, if each one of us, we are expecting ourselves to do whatever we can. So of course, I have much more of an expectation for any public figure with a lot of influence and ability to do something, to in fact do it. And I think we are deep in a constitutional crisis. This is a very dangerous point, and my expectation is the president will speak up for democracy and do whatever he can do publicly, constitutionally, to speak his commitment, his concern in any possible path and channel. And we have no more margins. We have no more security margins. We can't postpone it anymore. We can't do it the day after or any. I mean, this is D-Day. Today is D-Day. And the higher the rank is, the more I think the responsibility. So if the president is listening to us, we are now going to a protest. You're welcome to join us. So we are in fact witnessing the crumbling, the imploding of everything, of the front, and everything done said is costing us lives, literally life, because the judiciary overall and the war and everything that is happening also to Jewish communities outside Israel. I mean, the way Israel is conducting itself, the way Israel is now is perceived in the world, it brings up threats as a result of it, that the jury of outside of Israel is now exposed to threats, and Israel is not accepted anymore among the nations. Today, something was brought up that I think is an example to inspiring leadership. There was a conference at the Weizmann institutions. We've seen people coming from the Technion for solidarity, and the first session was opened by the Nobel laureate, Professor Chehanover. And the first slide in his presentation was science and education thrive only in democratic states. And that in fact, all of the things that we are so proud of, the great achievements of Israel fighting against Iran, the scientific developments, and truly the being so amazingly qualified in academics and professional, and these things, we are in fact still living on the lines of galaxies that have been darkened many years ago. I mean, it's different levels of excellence. What is this government leading forward? It's nothing. They're heading the Committee for Atomic Energy. A couple of decades ago, we've had Professor Yuval Ne'eman, who's a right-wing person, and he started the Detria movement. And of course, he was right-winged, but he was a prominent scientist, globally known, and he understood he understood the topic. And today, this committee is headed by Dudi Amsalem, a member of the Knesset. So just to say, where Israel is now headed downwards, and everywhere we look, we see that the level is decreasing, that the way that the Knesset members are speaking, the fact that education and culture are becoming nothing, the fact that artists, avant-garde, have signed a petition, 2,000 artists regarding Gaza, and then we've seen an opposition where mayors and even KKLJNF said that they're canceling a performance of someone signed on it, and then the person took back the signature. We are living in a reality of mechanism, of witch hunting people for elemental beliefs and actions just because they want to reflect the truth of reality, and all of these things taking place, to go back to the president or any other leader. I think that every one of us, and the president, of course, him, we must break it with our bodies and do whatever we can from every floor in order to break this terrible flood. Okay, thank you, Dina. Dan, I want to ask you a question from your strategic point of view as a cabinet member. Is there any logic in the decision to expand the war in the Gaza Strip, and could that help release the hostages? Could that bring, a ceasefire and end to the war? Because I mean, of course, we know that pressure kills hostages, but is there any logic to is there any method to the madness? I think there's no method to this madness. And what has been done for almost 20 months now, during the first 1 or 2 months, that these were necessary, first 2 months, and it was difficult, it was necessary. Ever since that, the war is waging, people are being killed, soldiers are being killed, hostages are being killed, people in Gaza are being killed. Yes, people are killed in wars, and I had the privilege of fighting wars, and it's a difficult thing. but you know what you want to achieve. You know what the purpose is. And now we don't know what's the purpose. Conquering another block in the city, where are we headed? So there's no method here. There's no logic. It's a political logic by deciding a goal that is unattainable. And I think there's something deeper here. Netanyahu at the time strengthened Hamas by providing them money from Qatar. And I don't want, I mean, just think of what happened here. Maybe I'll say talk a bit about that. Hamas took Gaza Strip with force 2007 after we left, completely withdrew. We withdrew. Some people think it's a positive, some people think it's a negative thing. But Hamas killed some of the PA people, and it wasn't Olmert, Lapid, or Bennett or Netanyahu who can take the Gaza Strip back from Hamas, not because they're good rulers, but because what can we do with it? But we must remember that even if you want to create some new modus operandi, I mean, it's Hamas. You can't open your eyes, look what is happening. I mean, he didn't check what was happening, which made him surprised on October 7th. Why did he do that? He doesn't want the PA. And he says it's not us, it's them, right? But ever since that 2005, after Arafat died, the PA is not conducting any terror attacks. I don't know if you remember that. Arafat used to be a source of terror. They are still paying people that we incarcerate, that's true, but they are not terrorizing us. They are cooperating with us against terror. So I'm not afraid of them, because I think speaking to them might help us in West Bank. So he wanted to maintain Hamas as some balance, as an oppositional strength to the PA, and the consequences are absolutely catastrophic. I mean, today, if they say anything about that, the government is going to dissolve. So there's no logic to this war. The prices we're paying are horrible. We are seeing now an international fallout because of some complaints. Some complaints might be anti-Semitical, but some of them are from fake campaigns, but some of them are real people. Tens of thousands of people were killed. It's terrible. And I'm not coming to any soldier saying they were wrong in what they did, but the results are difficult. It's difficult images. And this is happening in the rift in Israel. And there are people on reservists giving hundreds of days of their lives, and they want to continue on the war. They're forgetting that a normal state is peace, is no war. And now the war is becoming norm. I mean, let's say that the Yom Kippur War, in the fall, it was 12 days. And we need to stop the war phase and go to agreements phase, also with Iran. If we don't have any agreement, such as the JCPOA that Obama had, they're going to just get stronger. If we don't have an agreement with Hezbollah, with Lebanon, Hezbollah will, renew itself. We need to have an agreement with Syria. If we don't, I mean, there are now a lot of changes. Al-Julani, if you're following, we're having hardships with Turkey. We might try to achieve any agreements with Palestinians. I mean, the whole idea of agreements is not even on the table. It's just war. So I'm saying it's impossible to continue this way. The policy, the foreign affairs, agreements, any attempt to stabilize things, we can do that. Even if Iran, by the way, through the Americans, wants to have an agreement, we need to move on to an era of agreements, not war. But the government is not even there. The war in Gaza is endangering the lives of the hostages, according to what people are saying. I don't have information of, that you don't know, but of course it's risking lives. What's the goal? They don't have a goal. The states took Afghanistan, conquered Iraq and Afghanistan. $3 trillion was the cost of these wars. Then the moment they left, they started killing the civilians. Corpses are going home. You can't stop a war this way. With Hezbollah, we hit them, we left. What do you want to achieve? What's your purpose with Hamas? If you're just saying total victory, something mystical, it's something terrible. And the last thing is just a political maneuver that is supposed to maintain the government, because now they're talking about occupying Gaza, nuking Gaza, the whole messianic part of the government, trying to understand it. I mean, they weren't part of the classical Zionism. They're messianic, they're racist, and they are now in the midst of the government. Sure, part of the Likud, but also Ben Gvir and Smotrich, of course. Smotrich is not here, but when he's saying my wife will not share a hospital room with an Arabic woman in the maternity room, I mean, Can you imagine someone in the state saying, I will not lie in the same room with a Jewish woman? I mean, they would have been killed for speaking up like this. So the way they're speaking has to do with the war. It's a great move that we can't even understand, right? God is making a new order here. We need to work rationally about the basic things, basic values this state was founded on. We should be coming to an end because the interpreters are probably getting tired, but it's important for me to mention that this war we are speaking of, we are branding it here as a carnistic war, messianic, racist, and that explains why 80% of the population in Israel does not want this war anymore, does not want. Of course, they want to stop in order to release the hostages, many of which are, of course, many of us want to stop the war also because of the difficult images pouring from Gaza and also because of the internal rift, social rift in Israel. I want to stop you just one point. Just let me one thing. We don't need to ask why stop the war. We need to ask why have a war to begin with. We don't need a reason to stop it. We need a reason to continue it. It has no goal. It's not a question of why stopping it. A war is not the normal state. It's something you do when you have no other choice. It's something that you do when you have to, and I'm sorry for cutting in. No, this is so important what you said. I just want to mention we've had elections. I mean, we didn't have yet a committee to research the war, to analyze this war, the October 7th, and why they don't want to do it. They don't want to have elections, right? We're not there yet. There's still time before the next elections. He might use it. Who knows? I mean, it's like an excuse that is being prolonged. And I just want to try and summarize this very wonderful talk you gave. I'm happy to see that people are coming out to the streets. People are taking to the streets. I hope more people will go out to the streets and also leaders. The things at the moment, is it reversible? Is it possible that the Supreme Court might reverse it? Or maybe we are now headed towards. By the way, we haven't talked about the important point that the IDF is against. They had discussions in the cabinet. They are against expanding the war in Gaza. It wasn't decided yet. They had a meeting of it was a small meeting. They're going to pass it, but they haven't yet. The moment it's going to happen in a day or two. How are we heading? Where are we heading from here, Dina? And what do you think we should do from now on? And let me share with everyone still with us a list of a petition of Jewish leaders who are signing. We're asking everyone to sign, and we're going to share it soon. But Dina, what do you think we should do from now on? And what do you think are the next steps here in Israel?
Well, I think that to place all of our hopes and expectations and our pains on the back of the High Court of Justice, which is already a bit bent. It's unrealistic, and we can't have just one institution solving all the illnesses we've listed in our conversation, and we didn't even list them all. Israel is in a crisis situation. These are processes that have been going on for many years and have peaked over the past 2 years. And when the democratic skeleton starts to collapse, this skeleton collapses. It's like, if you compare it to the human body, then at a certain age or in a certain health condition, the bones begin to break in an increased fashion. And we have found ourselves at that point. And I have no doubt that the sacking of the Attorney General, it will be blocked by the High Court of Justice, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of the in-depth treatment that the state of Israel needs across the board. I think there's no way to escape this. Every leadership group in Israel, whether it's the business sector or the Histadrut, the Workers' Federation, or the high-tech leadership, mayors, academia that has already made a declaration. Any person in a position that can get people, swept after them, you need to declare that, you need to understand that it's now or never. All the people related to Israel, whether they live there or are emotionally invested in Israel because they care about it or they have
החוק
relatives there,
הקהילתי הזה היום
this state
הוא לא
entity
כזה
is
משהו
now,
שפשוט
I don't
אני
want
חיה
to
בו
use the
ואני
word
גדלת בזה
dying
ואני
because I live here and I raise my
והכל, אבל
children
נמצא
here and I
במצב
still have
מאוד
hope,
עמוק
but
מאוד
it
וקשה
is
מאוד.
very, very
ולכן אני חושבת
seriously ill. And I
להיות
therefore
איזושהי
think
פעולה
that
דרסטית
there must be
שיצאו
some kind of
לרחובות אנשים,
drastic action.
שהמשק
People
יושבת
need to take the
בלחץ של
streets. We
כל מי
need
שיכול
to,
להשפיע
the
בדרך
entire
כזאת או
economy
אחרת,
needs to go
לחזק
on
את תנועות
strike.
המחאה,
Anybody who can make an
יותר
impact needs
לחץ
to
לאופוזיציה
strengthen the
שהיא נתקלת בפחד גדול.
groups
יש
that are,
אתה מגשים
protesting,
היום את
and
התיאוריה
they're
של אופוזיציה, אבל חלק גדול
and
מהאופוזיציה פשוט לא
to put
קיים.
pressure on the
ואנחנו חייבים
opposition. There are some who are
לשתף
fighters
את
in the
המנהיגות
opposition, but
שלנו,
most
מה
of it
שעכשיו
is
התחלתם לעשות
almost
בקמפיינים, עכשיו
non-existent. And
מביאים
what
להם
you started
ויוצאים אל הקבוצות,
telling us that
יש
people
איתם
are
מחלפים,
now
פותחים
going
את
out to the
איילון, כי
streets
בעצם
and
אם
blocking
הממשלה הולכת
Ayalon and going
לקבל
to
החלטה
interchanges
להמשיך
and
ולהקריב את
junctions because
החיילים
the government is about to decide to
במלחמה
continue and
שהתחילה
sacrifice the
כמלחמה
soldiers in
מוצדקת,
a war that started
התפתחה
as a
וכבר נורא, ולא
justified
ברור
war,
כאילו,
and then it
ופשוט
got
עולה לנו
entangled
בחיים.
and it's not
אז אני
clear where
חושבת
it's heading and it's costing
שצריך
us
להבין
in
את
our
חומרת הרגע
lives.
הזה
And
בכל
you need to
דרך
understand
שהיא,
the severity
ולעשות
of this
כל אחד
moment
מאיתנו
in
מה
every
שיכול, מי
possible
שיש לו
way, and
דרך
anyone
אחרת,
should
מי
do whatever
שיכול
they
להשפיע
can.
בדרך אחרת,
If you have
מי שיכול
relatives in
להשפיע
Israel,
על
if you can
אנשים
have
שיכולים
an influence
להשפיע
in
על
a different
אנשים
way, if you
בישראל,
can influence people who can influence
ופשוט
people in
באמת
Israel, just,
זמן
people,
פקודה,
it's
אני
a
רק
time that
כמו
we all
שאמרתי,
need to show
שלא
up,
נפספס את
and
הרגע, שלא
we
נגיע
can't
באמת
miss this
לנקודת האל-חזור.
moment,
גם
so we
ככה,
won't find ourselves
כולנו
at a point of
יוצאים
no return. As it
לעשות את
is, even
הקיצון,
if
וגם
we
אם זה
do
לא הממשלה
succeed
עכשיו,
to
בזמן של
change the
הקיצון,
regime, and if we
וכל
have a
כך
new
הרבה דברים
government, it'll take
יתקעו
so long
ויורכבו
to correct
ויתפרעו
and fix
ויתמוטטו
everything because
ונכבשו,
things have
לא
broken
נחכה
down
כל
and
כך עבודת
weakened and,
תיקון תהיה
become
קשה
corrupt
וארוכה, אז
over the
לפחות
years. So the treatment
שיהיה לנו את
work is going
הסיכוי
to take
שנתקן את
years,
המצב.
but at least if
ופשוט
this way
הדרך
we'll have
לזה
a
היא
chance
פשוט
to
להחליף את הפוליטיקאים
rehabilitate and reconstruct. And the only way
לדרך
to do it
ולשוויון
is
אנחנו צריכות
replace
שיהיה לנו
these
תקומה.
politicians,
אנחנו
because
צריכות
with
להמשיך
this
לשקוע
current
עמוק יותר
political
ויותר ויותר נצא
figures,
ובה לא נוכל
we will
לצאת
have
משם.
no future. We'll keep
תודה
sinking
אדירה.
in and we won't
דן,
be
מילים
able to
אחרונות?
um,
אתה צריך לפצות
take
בפתיחת
our
תקווה,
steps
כי
back.
אני פה הרגתי.
You need to
צריך,
compensate me on
תראי,
the item of hope because I think I really
המצב
killed it,
קשה כפי
all hope.
שתיארנו
And,
בעצמנו, ואנשים גם
the
יודעים
situation is
בגלל זה מה
difficult, as
קרה.
we've said, and people
הוא לא
know,
חסר תקווה,
but it's not hopeless.
ואני חושב
And
ששורש העניין,
I think that the
שאנשים
root of
יבינו
it
מה עומד פה על
is
הפרק.
people
זה
need to
לא
understand
שאלה אם זה
what's at
יהיה
stake
שופט ולא
here.
יהיה
It's
שופטים.
not the question
כל
of whether
מערכת
this
הערכים.
person will be a
כל
judge or
ערכים
that person
היסטוריים.
will
העם
be the
היהודי
attorney
אחרי
general. I'm
2,000
talking about
שנה
the entire system because if
לקח
we speak in historic terms, the
לידיו
Jewish
הזדמנות
people, after
לבנות משהו
2,000
חדש
years of
ויפה.
exile, took an
והצלחנו
opportunity
לעשות
to
פה
build
פרויקט
something
אדיר
new
ומדהים,
and
גם
beautiful.
חזק,
And we've
שגם
managed to
היו יהודים
establish such
מתגלים
an
תורה, אז נהיה מאמין,
amazing
גם
endeavor here.
מוצלח,
7
גם
million Jews
צודק,
living
גם
in
יפה.
Israel, who would have
כל זה
believed?
היום צריך
And
סיכון.
all
והכל בידי
that
כל
is
אחד
under
מאיתנו.
risk today, and it's
שלושה
up to
ארבעה
each
דורות
and
של
every
יהודים,
one of
אנחנו,
us,
הורינו,
3 or 4
והורינו,
generations of
שעשו
Jews.
את
We,
המהפך
our
הזה
parents,
בחיים,
and our
ובנינו משהו
grandparents,
יפה.
we
וכל
did
אחד
this
צריך להרגיש
change in the
בארץ,
Jewish
ואם
people, and we built
בחוץ לארץ
something
עדיין,
beautiful.
אז
People in Israel
משם.
need to
עוד פעם,
react,
אני
and if
פונה
people live
לישראלים,
abroad,
אני
to
לא רוצה
respond from
מדינות
there.
אחרות
Once
שיתערבו
again, I
יותר,
always speak
לעשות כל מה
to
שיכול כדי
Jews and
לעצור את זה.
Israelis. I
אז יש
don't want
דרכים
other
שונות,
countries to
ואתה לא
intervene.
יודע מה
They need
בדיוק
to do everything
הצעד
possible to
שיעשה את זה,
stop
אבל
this, and
שלא
there
יבוא
are
יום
different
שאתה לא עושה
methods, and
משהו,
you don't know what
אז אני
will
עושה את זה הרבה
actually
בראיונות
tip the
ובהפגנות
scale. And I,
ובדברים כאלה,
often I
בשיחות
am
עם אנשים,
interviewed and I
אבל
speak
כל
in
אחד
demonstrations
לעשות,
and I
לחשוב
speak
מה
with
אני עושה
people,
היום.
and people
אבל אני
should try
חושב
and think what they can do
שבסך הכל
today. And I
רוב
think that,
הציבור לא מוצא את הדרך
the
הזאת.
majority of
רוב
Israelis,
הציבור
they
כן
don't
רוצה
want
להחליף את
this
הממשלה
path.
הזאת.
Most
לא כל אחד
Israelis
מסכים
want
לשפר,
to
לא כל
change
אחד
this
מבין את עומק
government.
העניין.
Not
אבל
everybody
זה צריך
understands,
להיות
the depth of this. Not
המשימה
everybody
של כל אחד
understands and
מאיתנו, ויש
agrees on
סיכוי,
every
אני חושב
point,
שיש
but
סיכוי
this should be a
שאנחנו
task
נחזיר
that we all take upon ourselves, and there's still a
המכונית הזאת
chance.
לדרך
I think
המלך
there's still a chance to
מהסמטה האפלה
get
שאנחנו
us
נמצאים בה
back
עכשיו.
on the right
זה
track
תלוי
from
בכל
this
אחד
dark
מאיתנו.
alley we're
העם לא
on
יבוא
right
משיח
now. And it
מבחוץ.
depends on each and
בידינו
every one
הדבר
of us. We
לעשותו.
won't have this Messiah
ואני
coming
אוסיף רק
from the
שכמו
outside.
שאמרת, כאן
And let me
4 דורות
just
בונים
add, as
את
you you've said this amazing endeavor was built on 4 generations and amazing collaboration between two sides of the ocean. And as somebody who lives here today in the US, I'd like to say that not only do we need to save the state of Israel, just like Yuval Noah Harari said, what happens in Israel affects us here, and
ולכן כאילו זה מוטיבציה כפולה.
therefore it's a
ואנחנו
double
חייבים להיות חלק
motivation
מזה,
for us, and we
וכשהצד
have to be
השני
part of it.
כבר
And when
התגייס,
the
צ'ק
other
כמה שנים
side,
טובות, כמה
I
עשרות שנים
think,
טובות,
has
מצד שני
been
מדבר על הצד
mobilized for
השמרני,
decades now. When I talk about the
היהודים,
other side, I'm talking about the
היהודים
Jewish
הליברליים הציוניים
conservatives.
צריכים להתגייס בשיא
Then
הכוח,
the liberal
אחרת
Zionist
זה
Jews
מלחמה
need
בין
to
שתי אידיאולוגיות,
be mobilized
ולא מלחמה
fully,
פוליטית.
because it's a war between two
אני באמת
ideologies. It's not a
רוצה
political
להודות
war.
המון
Yes,
המון
that's true. I'd like
לדינה,
to
לדן,
truly
לג'נט,
extend my
למיכל,
gratitude to
שקיבלתי פה
Dina,
מחמאות
Dan,
אדירות,
Janet, Michal,
וטלי
and
שהצטרפה
Talli.
אלינו
You've
על
all, and
התרגום,
Tani, who has joined us today,
ודודי
for your
ונרי,
interpreting. You've
ולכל מי
received a lot of
שהצטרף,
compliments, and
תחתמו על
David
העצומה
and Neri,
שתפתח
all of you
עכשיו,
who have joined us,
תעשו,
please
אנחנו
sign the
מתכנסים להפגנות
petition.
גדולות,
We
מקווים
are
בסוף שבוע
going
הבא,
to
אלא אם כן
have
משהו
some
יקרה והמלחמה
major
תסתיים,
demonstrations by the next weekend, unless something
ואנחנו
happens and the
רוצים
war
להשמיע
is
את
over.
הקול
And we'd
שאומר
like to make
שכולנו
our voice
רוצים,
heard, the
כמו שדן
voice
אמרה,
that says,
לא
just
צריך
like
להפסיק את
Dan
המלחמה,
said,
השאלה למה היא בכלל קיימת.
it's not the point
זהו,
that we need to
עד
stop the
כאן
war. The
להיום,
question is, why is it
אנחנו נהיה
still going
בקשר,
on?
נעדכן,
And that's it for
ותודה רבה
today.
דינה
We'll
ודן.
keep in touch. We'll
ערב
inform
טוב.
you
טוב,
all.
תודה
And
רבה.
thank you so much, Dina and Dan. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.